girls must protect themselves when they go out, or this will be the consequence. It's still not enough. Men look at the girl curiously, as if they have seen her somewhere before. Before he could remember, Sistine next to him immediately used magic to send the male lead flying. In this world where magic is supreme, the male lead was forced to come to the kingdom to teach, but because he rewarded himself too much last night, he overslept and hurried to the academy. It was at this time that he encountered Sistine and another. That's how the beginning scene happened. Encountering such an incident early in the morning, no one else would have expected it. However, they could never have expected that they would soon meet Glenn again. Today is the first day of school, and more than half of the class time has already passed, yet the new teacher has not shown up. While the classmates are puzzled, a familiar figure appears. Seeing Glenn's disheveled appearance, they could never have guessed that he was the new teacher. After a brief self-introduction, Sistine wanted to start the lesson quickly. Glenn picked up the chalk and quickly scribbled on the blackboard. Before anyone could react, the words self-study appeared in front of everyone. Glenn's first lesson was to let the students study by themselves while he himself fell asleep. Seeing a teacher more slack than the students was a first. In the following lessons, Glenn took slacking to an extreme. Not only was his handwriting particularly ugly, but even when a student encountered a spell they didn't understand and wanted to ask a question, all they got was "I don't know" from Glenn. Sistine couldn't stand it anymore. She openly criticized Glenn's irresponsible behavior, unable to understand how such a person could become a teacher. But Glenn took this as the students being too stupid to use a dictionary. Before Glenn had a chance to lecture, the bell for the end of class suddenly rang. He left the classroom faster than the students. Such a teacher is seen once in 100 years, but his antics didn't stop there. Like accidentally entering the girls' changing room or during lunch, finding the students so cute, he shoved peas into a girl's mouth and even ate someone else's lunch. Soon, Glenn's various actions were reported to the higher-ups by a fellow teacher with glasses. He couldn't understand how a third-rate magician could be a teacher. Despite his multiple requests to have Glenn dismissed, Glenn was a candidate recommended by the higher-ups. Just the day before, Celica had found Glenn and invited him to the kingdom to teach magic. Glenn initially refused, but Celica's dictionary did not include the word "no." She immediately showed her authority, and Glenn had no choice but to compromise. Knowing that the witch had recommended him, the glasses-wearing teacher knew the consequences of offending her, so he had to leave dejectedly. And the reason she protected Glenn so much was just to let him rediscover the meaning of magic. On Glenn's first day, aside from sleeping, he let the students study by themselves, which made Sistine unable to sit still. She immediately declared her identity as a daughter of the Fibel family, and just by speaking to her father, she could get Glenn fired immediately. Thinking that Glenn would change his teaching attitude, what was unexpected was that this was exactly what Glenn had been hoping for. He had been hoping to resign by slacking off, and now he even avoided a lot of trouble. With that, Sistine threw her glove hard at his face, and in this world where magic is supreme, this also meant a duel. She challenged him. "Do you dare accept my challenge? If she wins, she will make Glenn take his teaching seriously. If she loses, she will unconditionally comply with the opponent's demands. This girl, who has always revered magic, does not allow anyone to tarnish it." Seeing the girl's resolute expression, a familiar figure suddenly appeared before her eyes. Glenn picked up the glove and accepted the challenge. It was the first time he had seen a student challenge a teacher. To avoid injury, they decided to determine the winner through the use of volt shock, a common magic that can release a mild electric current to paralyze the opponent. The key to victory lay in who could chant the spell to activate the magic faster. As a teacher, chanting was the most basic skill, which meant Sistine had zero chance of winning. Knowing she would lose, Sistine began to tremble all over, but she did not back down. The duel began quickly. Sistine chanted first and launched her magic, yet Glenn was not at all flustered. Everyone thought a miraculous and extreme operation would unfold, but accompanied by a painful scream, everyone was stunned. Even Sistine could hardly believe it. To save face, Glenn temporarily changed the rules to best 2 out of 3. Even if he tricked her about a UFO in the sky, he was still hit first. After several consecutive defeats, one couldn't help but doubt whether Glenn could use magic. This duel was Sistine's victory, but Glenn shamelessly refused to acknowledge any agreement and disgracefully fled the scene. At that moment, Sistine didn't know that she would see Glenn in a new light tomorrow. It's not the bad students one fears, but a perverse teacher. The male lead had just been slapped by his student, but the next second, he actually wanted to marry the girl. Just now, the girl had intended to ask Glenn for advice, but was stopped by Sistine. She mocked Glenn for not understanding magic at all. This girl, who highly revered magic, believed that magic was the only way to lead humanity to eternity. However, Glenn denied this. Compared to medicine, agriculture, and construction, magic had not played any role, but had achieved extraordinary success in slaughter. It took the time to kill one person with swordsmanship, but magic could kill several. Such a thing, useless except for killing, still had so many learners. Hearing her revered thing being tarnished, the next second, a loud slap fiercely landed on Glenn's face. She couldn't help but cry. He watched the girl leave, heartbroken. In the evening, Glenn came alone to the rooftop, realizing he might have been too harsh, but it was just as well, finally giving him a legitimate reason to resign from the school. Meanwhile, Rumia, who was studying magic, caught his attention. Glenn's entrance startled the girl as she was reviewing the structure of a magic circle, which kept failing. She was about to give up when Glenn picked up a water bottle nearby and poured water around the magic circle. Then he asked Rumia to try again. The next second, the magic circle was successfully illuminated. Such beautiful magic was a first. Suddenly, in Rumia, Glenn seemed to see his younger self. On the way back, Glenn did not understand why Rumia was so dedicated to studying magic. From the girl, he learned she hoped to use magic to help humanity. As a child, she had been kidnapped by bandits in an accident. Just when she thought she would die, a righteous magician appeared and saved her. It was then that Rumia decided to repay her savior by believing that if she could one day harness the value of magic to help those in need and follow the right path, she would definitely find the magician who saved her life. Watching Rumia's adorable face, Glenn felt a familiar sensation, though he couldn't recall why. Meanwhile, Rumia revealed that Sistine cared about magic because it was the only bond she had with her grandfather, a magician whose only regret before dying was not exploring the Sky City. Sistine had promised her grandfather that she would become an even greater magician than he was and would uncover the secrets of the Sky City. This morning, everyone's eyes widened as Glenn, while apologizing to Sistine, decided to take his teaching seriously to inspire awe in his students. Normally, a spell that required 3 chants to cast, Glenn modified it to require 4. The casually released lightning could even turn corners, leaving everyone dumbfounded. By constantly altering the length of the chants, Glenn demonstrated the versatility of magic. Glenn explained that magic isn't as difficult as it seems. It's more about understanding the human heart. To help the students understand better, Glenn approached Sistine and confessed his feelings, causing her to blush instantly. It was like using magic to influence an object. Glenn's lessons were not only interesting but also easy to understand. Soon, his influence expanded, and some students were so eager that they would stand just to attend his class. After hearing about Glenn's newfound popularity, Celica, his mentor, felt relieved to see her disciple finally motivated. She informed Glenn that she needed to leave the kingdom the next day and entrusted him with the responsibility of protecting the academy. The next morning, Glenn headed to the academy as usual, but strangely, the usually bustling streets were empty. Suddenly, 2 men in black military uniforms appeared with the intent to eliminate Glenn. Meanwhile, as everyone waited for their teacher, the 2 men barged in. Sistine warned them to leave, but one man raised his finger, and a second later, a spell whizzed by, leaving a large hole in the wall. It turned out to be military magic, and the men were there to find Rumia, to eliminate the illegitimate daughter of the queen, the real princess. The men, looking at the young girl's innocent face, smirked evilly as they prepared to harm her. The girl, in despair, begged the man to spare her, which only excited him more. Just as the situation reached a critical point, Glenn suddenly appeared. Apologizing for interrupting, Glenn approached, and Sistine urged him to run, knowing he was no match for the kidnappers. However, it was too late. The kidnappers launched a spell at him, but strangely, it failed to activate. It turned out that Glenn held the Fool Tarot card, which could block all magic nearby, like activating a physical cheat. But sadly, it also prevented its user from casting spells. Hearing this, the kidnapper nearly laughed himself to death. But unbeknownst to him, Glenn didn't need magic to win. Through a series of smooth, tactical maneuvers, he left the kidnapper questioning his life choices. Unbelievably, Glenn, a magician, was proficient in the Imperial military's hand-to-hand combat techniques. In order to extract information about Rumia, Glenn decided to question the kidnapper. At that moment, Glenn noticed a tattoo on the kidnapper's body, which caught his attention. After informing Celica of the Academy's invasion, he learned from her that the attackers were indeed members of the Celestial Magic Association, the Empire's largest evil force. Unfortunately, at that time, Celica was not in the Empire. Before ending the call, Celica told Glenn to make sure he didn't die. But before she could finish her sentence, countless skeletal knights suddenly emerged from a black magic circle nearby. They first executed the failed kidnapper, and then turned to deal with Glenn and another person. The skeletal knights were not only very sturdy, but also extremely powerful in combat. With no other options left, the two had to flee. Upon seeing the long legs of the skeletal knights, Glenn switched to a holding tactic. Meanwhile, Sistine hurriedly activated a whirlwind magic array. Since it was her first attempt at such a large-scale array, Sistine was not very confident. However, thinking of Glenn's trust in her, she could not allow herself to fail. Soon, the array was ready, and at Glenn's command, the magic was successfully activated. Unfortunately, the wind was not strong enough to knock down the knights. Glenn then took out a red magic stone. It turned out that the reason he had Sistine activate the wind array was to enhance the damage of the flames released. Although they successfully dealt with the knights, Glenn was exhausted from using high-level magic. Meanwhile, the crisis was not yet over, as there were more kidnappers. Seeing the floating sword above the man, Glenn sensed trouble. He wanted Sistine to use a sealing curse to neutralize the sacred sword, but at that moment, she had no magic power left. At that point, there was only one option left: sacrifice a teammate. He pushed the girl down the stairs. After sending Sistine away, despite having the Fool's Tarot card, it was useless against the already activated magic. Moreover, the opponent wielded a sacred sword. After toying with him for a while, the man decided not to waste any more time. Watching the sacred sword coming towards him, Glenn let his body be pierced. At that moment, he was still chanting spells. Meanwhile, Sistine quickly returned. It turned out that the moment she was pushed by Glenn, she realized that Glenn had done so to buy time to regain her magic power. After neutralizing the sacred sword, Glenn picked up a sword and impaled the man. After 2 major battles, Glenn's injuries were severe, but he was not ready to give up on rescuing Rumia. When he woke up, he found out that Sistine had exhausted her magic to save him. Once recovered, Glenn successfully found Rumia. However, the final mastermind appeared. Glenn didn't want to waste words and sought a quick battle. The opponent had anticipated this and had already set up a magic circle on Rumia that would blow up the entire campus as a threat if he was killed. In a difficult situation, Glenn took off his gloves and bit his wrist. As blood flowed continuously from his hand, Glenn attempted to forcefully break the magic circle. Unexpectedly, this was only one layer of a 5-layer circle. If the circle was indeed broken, Glenn would also die from excessive blood loss. Rumia didn't know why Glenn went to such extremes. From Glenn's own words, she learned that he had once aspired to become a just magician. However, after experiencing too much bloodshed, he began to question the essence of magic. It wasn't until he met 2 people that he realized he had always loved magic from the beginning. With only one layer of the magic circle left, Glenn collapsed in a pool of blood. Ignoring the restrictions of the magic circle, Rumia broke through forcefully and transferred all her power to Glenn. After being bathed in holy light, magical power surged within Glenn. It was said that espers could trigger the magical power within the objects they touched, and Rumia was indeed an esper. Soon the last magic circle was broken, and a golden light spread across the entire empire. By the time Sistine arrived just in time, the man had been dealt with, and at that moment, Glenn lay sleeping on Rumia's lap. Through this ordeal, Glenn found out that Rumia was actually the princess of the empire. She had been targeted for assassination in secret, because, as an Esper, she could potentially overthrow the entire country. This revelation also solidified Glenn's resolve to continue teaching, as he still had two such adorable students. What is it like to have a wealthy adoptive mother? To continue enjoying being supported, the male protagonist resorted to kneeling, hoping to win the sympathy of the rich woman. However, this time Celica refused, as she didn't want to support a grown baby forever. Since Glenn was so poor that he couldn't even afford meals, the professor informed him that if Glenn's class could win the upcoming magic competition, they would receive a prize money. It turned out that just yesterday, after learning that Rumia was still alive, the queen wanted to visit her at the Magic Academy. However, due to her special identity, she had to use the magic competition as a cover. The competition would start next week. To gather enough participants, the two started recruiting early in the morning. However, no one was willing to participate as everyone believed they would lose, especially with the queen attending, which could lead to embarrassment. Just when they were at a loss, Glenn arrived, confident of victory. Upon hearing that the students were reluctant to join, this usually unserious teacher promised to lead everyone to victory. Under Glenn's strategic guidance, not only did everyone participate, but each person competed in their area of expertise. It was the first time they truly saw Glenn in a new light. Unknown to them, Glenn was actually motivated by the prize money. Meanwhile, the bespectacled man informed that it was customary for other classes to let some of their best students participate to increase the chances of winning. Glenn suddenly realized that this would bring him closer to the prize money. However, Sistine objected, believing that Glenn wanted everyone to participate to help each person improve. Sistine's sudden intervention frustrated Glenn. That afternoon during training, there was a dispute over the allocation of the training field between Class 1 and Class 2, and the bespectacled man was actually Class 1's teacher, Hallie. Hallie told Glenn to take Class 2 elsewhere for training, as resources should not be wasted on underperformers. Unable to tolerate his students being insulted, Glenn impulsively bet 3 months' salary that his Class 2 would win. But when he saw the looks from the students, he couldn't refuse the bet. Hallie agreed. It was just a casual remark, but the other party took it seriously. Glenn was planning to kneel and beg again, wanting to retract the bet. Just then, Sistine suddenly appeared. She immediately declared that Glenn would not be a deserter and that he would definitely lead everyone to victory. Faced with this difficult situation, it was impossible to back out now. Over the following days, Glenn changed his usual demeanor, teaching earnestly each day. By evening, thinking about the queen's visit the next day, Rumia felt very anxious. Painful memories emerged before her eyes, when she had been abandoned by her mother and was saved by a righteous magician. She couldn't understand why her mother had abandoned her. But fortunately, she was later adopted by Sistine's parents, which gave her a happy life now. Time quickly came to the day of the competition. After the queen's speech, the magic competition officially began. At that moment, the necklace worn by the queen caught Rumia's attention. The first competition was a mental confrontation. Glenn sent Rumia to compete. Seeing the frail Rumia by his side, Jael told her to forfeit immediately. However, Rumia did not back down. Instead, she confidently declared she would win. After all, she had her trusting teacher and classmates behind her. The first event was hypnosis. As the magicians launched the hypnotic spell, the competitors resisted through their magic. Those with lesser skill were eliminated first. However, when the magician saw the adorable Rumia, he began to act more perversely, shaking his tongue crazily while casting a charm spell. His creepiness was off the charts in the entire anime world. Soon, only Rumia and Jael were left. For the final test, the magician would launch a mental destruction spell, a kind of magic that could disrupt the opponent's thinking, causing them to fall into a stupor. Unexpectedly, both endured it. Rumia's resilience made Jael admire her. Soon, the magician intensified his efforts. Rumia knelt on the ground, but even so, she still refused to give up. At that moment, Glenn appeared and forfeited for her. Facing such a strong opponent, it was already remarkable that she had held on till now. When the referee interviewed after the match, it was discovered that Jael had lost consciousness earlier, meaning Rumia had won the match. Seeing her daughter shine on stage, the queen was very relieved. Celica, noticing this, suggested that the queen should meet Rumia. At this moment, Glenn was unaware that disaster was about to strike. Before dawn, The girl, blushing, asked the teacher to let her go. The man also blushed, breathing heavily, claiming that it was tough without proper training. Seeing the two sweating profusely in the small woods, you watching the screen must be shocked, but in reality, they were practicing boxing. Such a training method was indeed unique. Today, to enhance Sistine's magic power, Glenn had given her special training. Such an early start had exhausted Glenn. Just as the three were preparing to head to the academy, a girl suddenly appeared from behind and immediately swung a great sword at them. Fortunately, Glenn reacted in time. The girl, with a silly look, thought this was the best way to greet a comrade after a long separation. While the two were puzzled, Glenn explained, the queen had sent Rel as a bodyguard to protect Rumia. Although they knew someone would be sent over, they never expected it to be Rel. As a member of the Magic Guide group, Rel was not exactly sharp-witted. To prevent her from revealing her own identity, Glenn had to do some preemptive adjustments to her brain. It was Rel's first day transferring schools. Watching her cluelessly adorable expression, the boys were instantly excited. When it was her turn to introduce herself, despite being reminded just moments before, Rel almost slipped up and revealed her identity. Helplessly, Glenn had to play the benevolent father role. Meanwhile, seeing the closeness between the two, the classmates were curious about their relationship. Before Glenn could explain, the girl immediately declared that Glenn was her everything. This statement took everyone by surprise, including Sistine, who was extremely shocked. Today, they had a practical magic class. Through controlling magic, Sistine successfully hit the target. Blushing at Glenn's praise, she was quite shy. When it was Rel's turn, seeing her as a rival, Sistine was very curious about Rel's capabilities. Unexpectedly, after several magical shots, Rel missed the target each time. With only one chance left, upon learning that magic wasn't necessarily required to hit the target, she summoned a magical sword using a military spell in front of everyone and effortlessly shattered the target. However, due to Rel's overwhelming power, no one dared approach her after that. Only Rumia stood by her side, and under their guidance, Rel went to the cafeteria. A strawberry cake caught her attention. Since it was her first time trying it, Rel devoured it greedily. Watching Rel act like a child, Sistine let down her guard. Soon, with their help, once everyone realized Rel wasn't prone to random acts of violence, they all wanted to get to know her better. It turned out the worries were needless. Early that day, due to a planned school trip, Glenn decided to take everyone to the beach. The choice of the beach was actually to feast his eyes. Since it was the beach, swimsuits were essential. While several girls were strolling, a sleazy man started hitting on them. Once Glenn distracted the girls, he quickly identified the man's identity. As a member of the Magic Guide group, Albert kindly warned Glenn to be careful with Rel, as she was an emotionless killing weapon. Watching the girls enjoy themselves, the boys sincerely appreciated Glenn. After finishing the day at the beach, as evening approached, the boys made a plan to sneak into the girls' dormitory to create some memorable youthful moments. However, Glenn had anticipated this and, despite his interference, they were not ready to give up. Watching Glenn and the boys scuffling, it was the first time Rel saw Glenn so happy, as he had been quite despondent before. In the middle of the night, Rel secretly approached Glenn. She couldn't understand why Glenn would leave the Magic Guide group and abandon her. She wanted Glenn to return by her side. Glenn hoped that Rel could find the meaning of life as her brother had hoped. At these words, the girl erupted emotionally, blaming everything on Rumia and another person, believing they had taken Glenn away from her. Since she couldn't have him, she decided to destroy him. That night, Sistine returned to her room only to find Rumia lying in a pool of blood. This was the most extreme form of revenge she had ever seen. The girl had stabbed the protagonist in the back and then personally killed his beloved. Seeing Rumia in a pool of blood, Sistine couldn't believe that the adorable Rel was actually a legendary murderer. Before this, because of Glenn's abandonment, Rel was very distracted along the way. Suddenly, she tripped and fell hard to the ground. The two of them wanted to help her up, but Rel rejected their help. Before Sistine could lecture her, the cute girl suddenly burst out, declaring that she hated people like them the most. Suddenly disliked by Rel, the two were very confused. Soon, the classmates finally arrived at their destination. Under the professor's lead, everyone toured the Magic Research Institute known for its biological research. Here, they could see various hybrid creatures created through magic. While everyone was amazed, Rumia felt very uneasy, as these were still lives after all. Meanwhile, the professor came over to explain that the reason for such research was the Resurrection Project. Before the professor could explain further, Glenn interrupted him. The Resurrection Project was a study that involved combining human genes with magic to bring the dead back to life. But the resurrected were like puppets without any memories. Because this research violated humanitarian principles, it had been strictly forbidden by the Empire long ago. From Burks, it was learned that the results of this research had been stolen by the Cult of Heaven, who had already successfully resurrected a human being. After a day of academic discussion due to Rel's abnormal behavior throughout the day, Rumia was quite concerned. Sistine wanted to take Rel out for a meal, but Rel did not want to interact with them. Glenn tried to persuade Rel to reconcile with her friends, but this had the opposite effect. At this moment, Rel blamed everything on Sistine and the others. If it weren't for their appearance, why would Glenn have left her? Just as she was unsure what to do, a familiar voice came through. Surprisingly, the man in front of her was Rel's brother, who had died long ago. Although they didn't know why Rel was angry, remembering that Rel once expressed a desire to be friends with them, Sistine decided to prepare a big meal for her before she returned. At the same time, looking at this familiar brother who was supposed to have died a year ago, it turned out that he was saved by the Cult of Light at the brink of death. In return, he hoped Rel would help him capture Rumia and eliminate Glenn, the troublesome magician. Recalling the time spent with everyone, Rel was unsure what to do. Just then, Glenn arrived in time. He knew that the man in front of him was a puppet resurrected by the Cult of Light. Because his true nature was revealed, this made Rel no longer trust her brother. Glenn intended to join forces with Rel to eliminate the man. But the next second, Glenn was impaled by a large sword. He had never expected Rel to betray him. Meanwhile, Sistine happily returned with the ingredients, but as soon as she opened the door, she was shocked by the scene in front of her. Seeing Rumia lying in a pool of blood, with Rel being the main culprit and Rel informing that Glenn had died, hearing the devastating news of Glenn's death, Sistine was utterly devastated. She didn't understand why Rel would do such a thing. As Rumia was about to be taken away, Sistine knew she was no match but still wanted to stop it. However, out of fear, she hesitated to use her magic. Watching Rumia being taken away, Sistine finally realized how cowardly she was. She cried inconsolably. At that moment, the door was kicked open. Albert brought back Glenn, who was on the brink of death. Standard healing magic no longer worked. To save Glenn, advanced resurrection magic, which required a vast amount of magical power, was necessary. Albert needed Sistine's help due to the time constraints. However, time was running out as Glenn had already stopped breathing. Before the resurrection ritual could begin, someone needed to continuously perform CPR on Glenn. Although it had never been practiced before, to save Glenn's life, the girl hesitated briefly before giving her first CPR attempt. When Glenn finally woke up, Sistine was by his side, having passed out due to exhaustion of her magical powers. From Albert, it was learned that through his investigation, it turned out that Burks was also a member of the Cult of Light. He had not told Glenn because he wanted to use Rumia as bait to capture them all at once. Unexpectedly, Rel betrayed them midway. Glenn instructed Albert to leave the matter to him. After all, Rel was someone he had brought back himself. Meanwhile, the abducted Rumia was not dead. Burks had extracted her genes to create a puppet capable of overthrowing the entire kingdom. Glenn, brought back to life, led by Albert, located the enemy's position, which was also anticipated by the professor. While the two were relaxing their guard in confusion, suddenly, a synthetic lion appeared before them. Although it looked ferocious on the surface, it was merely a showpiece and was defeated within seconds. Watching his pride, the synthetic beasts, being easily dispatched one after another, made the professor furious enough to take action himself. The moment the professor left, a maid left the matter in the hands of this man, as she did not want to die here. As they were about to reach Rumia's location, the professor appeared in front of them. The next second, his body began to undergo bizarre transformations, turning into a twisted monster. Albert decided to stay behind to buy time, while Glenn went to rescue Rumia. Just as the experiment was about to be completed, suddenly Glenn burst through the door. Seeing Glenn unharmed also made Rumia breathe a sigh of relief. However, there were still two obstacles in front of them. As Glenn approached, Rel, who had been brainwashed successfully, did not allow anyone to harm her brother and immediately summoned a magic sword to confront Glenn. Despite Rel's usual foolish appearance, Glenn had no chance to retaliate while dodging her slashes. In the midst of this, Glenn pulled out a secret weapon, unexpectedly a revolver cheat gun, which stopped Rel's attack. While holding her at bay, Glenn wanted to know if Rel still remembered her brother's name. However, this made Layer nervous nearby. It was a simple question, yet strangely, Rel couldn't remember at all. Seizing the opportunity, Glenn threw the revolver aside and tackled Rel, knocking her out with a single blow. After destroying the experimental apparatus, he also landed a heavy punch on Layer. Meanwhile, the unconscious Rel remembered her origins. 10 years ago, a scientist named Shin, using magic, had created her, but was assassinated by a blonde companion midway through. The reason did this was because Shin had contacted Glenn, who was still serving in the Magic Corps at the time, the day before. He had hoped that Glenn would help him and Rel escape the organization. However, by the time Glenn arrived, it was already too late, and she was indeed Rel. The reason Rel could not remember was because Layer had tampered with her memories. An enraged Glenn immediately cast a spell to deal with Layer, but it was too late. Through the extraction of Rumia's magical power, 3 puppets that looked like Rel were created. At Layer's command, one of them attacked Rel. Glenn saved her life at the critical moment. Rel didn't understand why Glenn would save her, especially since she had been harsh to her comrades. However, in Glenn's heart, he had long considered Rel as his little sister. He hoped that one day Rel would find something important to live for. Hearing this, Rel was no longer confused and personally dealt with her sisters. As Glenn approached, Layer sensed trouble. At that moment, no magic could stand against Glenn. Staring down the barrel of a gun pointed at his forehead, Layer thought he would be executed on the spot. Unexpectedly, Glenn, defying martial ethics, punched Layer to the ground instead. Meanwhile, Albert had successfully dealt with the professor. Eventually, Rel was forgiven by her comrades. That evening, Rel was invited to dine at Sistine's home. The warmth of her parents initially made Rel feel shy. At the same time, it seemed Sistine's father had something to say, but forgot at the last moment. After the dinner ended, Rel wanted to apologize for her past actions, but it was clear that they didn't hold it against her. It was also at this time that Rel resolved to protect them for life. That morning, as Sistine was organizing documents, Glenn suddenly appeared. He intended to thank Sistine for saving his life, but recalling the moment she had kissed Glenn, Sistine blushed intensely. Meanwhile, as 2 people hurried over, Rel, thinking Glenn had bullied Sistine, immediately attempted to punish Glenn with her magic sword. As Glenn was blasted onto the street, a carriage drove by. But fortunately, a man saved him. The man who appears as Fibel's fiancé. In one of the most melodramatic scenes I've witnessed, the girl confessed her love for the male lead in front of her fiancé. Before the man could recover from his shock, the prize was who could marry the girl. Amid Rel's punishment, Glenn was thrown into the street, nearly crushed by a carriage. But fortunately, the man used magic to save his life. However, Glenn could never have imagined that this man, Leos, was Sistine's fiancé. As Sistine's fiancé and also a magic teacher, he had come at the invitation of the academy. This was Leos's first day on the job, and his teaching was simple and easy to understand, not inferior to Glenn's. However, this made Glenn very worried. Teaching the students military magic without them understanding the pros and cons of magic could lead some students astray. Rumia also realized this. Meanwhile, Leos found Sistine and wanted to take the girl out for a walk and finalize their wedding date. As Sistine was led away, Rumia hoped Glenn would help her. Unbeknownst to the couple strolling in the grove, several people were watching everything. Seeing the timing was right, Leos no longer hid his intentions and hoped Sistine would marry him immediately. Unexpectedly, she refused. Sistine wanted to learn more magic to fulfill a promise to her grandfather, but this was met with ridicule from Leos. Instead of wasting your time on something impossible, why not create a beautiful future for yourself? Just as Sistine was wavering, Glenn suddenly burst in. He would never allow his student to give up her dreams. The moment she saw Glenn, Sistine had a bold idea. to publicly admit in front of her fiancé that she was already Glenn's. With one look from Sistine, Glenn instantly understood. While making Leos jealous, Glenn also spilled the beans about the previous night, claiming they had spent it together in bed. Who could tolerate being cuckolded like this? Leos vowed to make Glenn pay. Seeing Leos lose his reason, Glenn did not want to entrust his student to such a man. He took off his gloves and challenged Leos to a duel. Thus began a duel between men. To ensure Sistine's family would have a lazy son-in-law, Glenn decided to train his students intensively. It turned out the duel would be determined through a class competition. Soon, Glenn's situation reached Albert's ears. He received intelligence that someone had brought angel dust into the Magic Academy, a drug that could turn people into zombies. But Glenn could never have imagined that a conspiracy was coming. The day of the duel arrived. The competing classes would have to either take over the opponent's base or defeat the leading teacher to win. Before the duel began, Leos didn't forget to publicly display his affection, making people wonder whom Sistine really wanted to marry. Although it was a duel initiated by them, deep down, Sistine still wanted to be with Glenn. Thinking about this made the girl blush with embarrassment. Soon, the magic contest between Class 2 and Class 4 began. Led by Leos, Class 4 had overwhelming strength. Just when everyone thought Class 2 would lose, Glenn wasn't worried at all. After all, he had Rel, a monster cheat. But that wasn't all. Glenn then appeared in Class 4's sight, and after taunting them, he attempted to flee. This shameless act instantly enraged everyone, but they didn't realize they had fallen into Glenn's trap. This strategy of luring the enemy deep was unmatched. Soon, Class 4 was scared into consecutive retreats. Eventually, the duel ended in a tie due to time constraints. Tying with Class 4 was very gratifying for Glenn. Meanwhile, Leos, having lost the duel, harshly scolded Class 4. Glenn was about to intervene when Leos threw down his glove, challenging Glenn to a duel. The two bet themselves as stakes, which greatly annoyed Sistine. But Glenn, ignoring her feelings, rashly accepted Leos's challenge. The next second, a slap came his way. She hated Glenn's selfishness. This was the second time Sistine despised Glenn. But even so, he still decided to win tomorrow's match. Perhaps this was the best way to atone to Sarah. Meanwhile, Sistine suddenly appeared. She wanted to apologize to Glenn, but before that, she wanted to know who Sarah was and why Glenn had to duel Leos no matter what. At this point, Glenn no longer held back. Once, he was a boy obsessed with magic, aspiring to be a champion of justice. Later, he became the leader of a magic squad. But faced with harsh reality, he gradually began to doubt magic. Whenever this happened, there was always someone silently supporting him. Later, during a mission, due to his own mistake, a comrade died. And since then, the boy who loved magic lost interest in everything. Until he met Sistine. Because Sistine and Sarah looked very much alike, Glenn saw protecting Sistine's dreams as a way to atone for his past with Sarah. After hearing about Glenn's ordeal, Sistine was not angry. She hoped Glenn would continue to pursue his own dreams, while she would bravely fulfill the promise made to her grandfather. In that moment, Glenn thought he saw Sarah's shadow in her. While the two were teasing each other playfully, a familiar voice was heard. Leos decided that tonight, he would deal with Glenn. What Glenn did not expect was that Leos would use the Empire's military combat techniques. But that was not the most outrageous part. In a mere classroom, they could use thought form magic, a high-level magic that transforms imagination into reality. Even though Glenn possessed the Fool's Tower card, which nullifies magic, it was utterly useless. Defeated, Glenn left dejectedly. Sistine wanted to follow him, but Leos stopped her. Seeing Sistine still wanting to resist, Leos dropped his disguise. He warned that Sistine must marry him, or he would destroy everything she loved. From that day, Glenn never appeared again. Today was the day Sistine was to marry Leos. Forced to marry someone she did not love, this was her only regret in life, the most unsettling ending I've ever seen. On the wedding day, the girl wore her dream wedding dress, but she could not feel any joy because the groom was not the boy she deeply loved. Forced to marry someone she did not love, this was perhaps her only regret. Since the day he lost the duel, Glenn had disappeared, and Sistine, to protect her companions, ultimately gave up her dreams and chose to marry Leos under the watchful eyes of everyone. After the priest finished the blessings, the next step was the vow kiss. Even though Sistine was prepared, tears welled up in her eyes. Suddenly, the door was pushed open. Just as everyone expected, Glenn came. Glenn would not allow Sistine to marry someone she did not love. His purpose in coming was to steal the bride away. After using a smoke bomb to obscure the view, amidst the cheers of their classmates, Glenn successfully took Sistine away. Sistine kept beating on Glenn's chest, overwhelmed with mixed emotions. He did not understand why Glenn had appeared now. It turns out that since losing the match, Glenn had locked himself in his room until Rumia found him. Hearing that Sistine was threatened by Leos, Glenn knew he was no match for Leos, so he had been preparing for today. Then, suddenly, a group of zombie-like villagers appeared. Glenn realized this was a symptom of the angel dust infection. Humans infected would turn into walking corpses, obeying the commands of their manipulator. Glenn told Sistine to run quickly, but it was too late. Just as they were about to be overtaken, fortunately, Glenn reacted in time and mercilessly dealt with these dehumanized monsters. Facing the relentless pursuit of the zombies, in front of Sistine, Glenn's actions seemed extremely brutal, but he had no choice, because 3 years ago, it was these infected humans who caused him to lose his beloved. He did not want to repeat the past. Witnessing all this, Sistine was extremely frightened. To her, Glenn was now a complete and utter devil. Meanwhile, the real villain appeared, but it was not actually Leos, but Jatis, a fellow member of the Magic Guild, who had assassinated Leos and then disguised himself as him. Seeing this, Glenn told Sistine to run quickly, because he knew well this was the only chance for her to survive. As a member of the Magic Guild, Jatis, addicted to killing, was later expelled by Glenn. Today, he was here to redeem his honor. On the other side, Sistine, who had collapsed, was filled with regret. Glenn had been risking his life to protect her all along, yet she had not only failed to help him, but had also begun to fear him, leaving the girl unsure of what to do. Meanwhile, Glenn was engaged in a bitter struggle. Even bullets, fast as lightning, could not touch Jatis. Even high-level magic seemed like child's play in front of Jatis. Soon, in front of Jatis's angel-class artifact, Glenn was defeated. But that was not enough. Just as he was about to meet his end, a magical attack came at a critical moment. What Glenn never expected was that it was Sistine. In her heart, Glenn had already become irreplaceable. She did not want to lose Glenn ever again. Faced with the girl's heartfelt confession, Glenn felt revitalized. As he took off his military uniform, he decided to join Sistine in defeating Jatis and return her to her companions. But she refused, preferring that they both return safely together. At this moment, the two became each other's only support. As the saying goes, men and women together double the attack power. Faced with the angel-class artifact, Sistine used her magic to destroy it one by one, while Glenn provided cover and leaped up, landing a heavy punch on the target. But it was not over yet. After all, villains always struggle before dying. Jatis then released all his magical power, summoning an angel goddess. Unfortunately, the joy lasted only 3 seconds, as Sistine used her magic to blast a huge hole through the angel goddess. Jatis attempted to repair it, but it was a step too late. Finally, at the moment the sacred sword fell, Glenn struck Jatis first. Although he achieved the final victory, Sistine had exhausted all her magic by then. While Glenn was checking Sistine's injuries, Jatis took the opportunity to escape, vowing to defeat Glenn next time. At the end of the story, Glenn returned to the academy and continued as a teacher beloved by the students. 1 year after Sistine graduated, Glenn and she also stepped into the Hall of Marriage.